Okay, let's unpack this. Amy Winehouse. When you picture her, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, it's got to be the voice, right. And the look, the beehive, the eyeliner. Totally iconic.
Exactly. Instantly recognizable. But there's that deep paradox too, isn't there? This incredible, almost otherworldly talent side by side with these very public, very difficult struggles.
It's a really powerful and ultimately incredibly sad story. And for this deep dive, we've gone through all the sources you gave us, the articles, research, your notes, trying to really get a handle on the complexity.
Right, not just recounting events.
No, the aim is to pull out the key insights, the nuggets of knowledge from this material that help explain why things happened the way they did.
Yeah, our mission here is to get past the tabloid headlines
Yeah.
and really understand what these sources are telling us are the key factors. Her musical genius, obviously, but also her inner world, the foundation she was in, the pressures of fame, and the roles, often really complicated roles played by the people around her, all leading up to that tragic end.
And that talent, it was there right from the start. Growing up in London, music was just everywhere for her.
Her dad, Mitch, right, big Sinatra fan.
Yeah, sang to her all the time. And her grandmother, Cynthia, she loved jazz. So that foundation was laid really early. Plus, she just had this naturally deep, expressive voice, a contralto.
And she wasn't just singing other people's stuff. She started writing really young, didn't she? Like teenage years.
Absolutely. Crafting these incredibly honest, kind of witty songs. And her first album, Frank, back in 2003, that really showcased it. Loads of jazz influence, but totally her own experiences, her sharp lyrics.
Frank got people talking, seriously talking. Mercury Prize nomination.
Won an Ivor Novello
Yeah.
for Stronger Than Me.
Yeah.
Critics immediately picked up on that mix, like an old soul, but with this totally modern, raw edge. They talked about the witty, brutally honest lyrics and smoky vocals. It was clear she was different.
But then came back to black in 2006, and that just, well, exploded.
That was the one. Working with Mark Ronson's Salaam Remi, channeling that whole 60s girl group Motown vibe, but somehow making it sound completely new.
And the reaction was just huge.
Phenomenal. One of the UK's biggest selling albums ever. Won a Brit Award. And the single, Rehab, I mean...
Became the song, didn't it? Almost too iconic, given everything. They tried to make me go to rehab. I said, no, no, no. Everyone knew that line.
Everyone. And that song, plus others like I'm No Good, Love is a Losing Game, they just launched her globally.
Then the Grammys in 2008, that was historic.
Totally. 5 Grammys in one night. Best New Artist included. First British woman ever to do that. The sources really hammer home how influential she became, even with just those 2 studio albums, blending blues, jazz, soul, funk. It was like undefinable in a way.
But alongside that massive success, the sources really dig into her inner world, which is just as vital to understanding her story.
Yeah, and she was surprisingly open about it. Talked about depression, feeling these mood swings, this darkness, even when she was a kid.
And songwriting was how she dealt with it, almost like a lifeline.
Definitely. There's that quote, isn't there, where she says she writes songs because I'm fed in the head and need to get something good out of something bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she felt this pressure, like, I'm gonna die if I don't write down the way I feel.
It explains why the lyrics feel so raw, like you're reading her diary.
You really hear it. I told you I was trouble in I'm no good. Just laying it bare.
Or the heartbreak in Back to Black, I died 100 times. It's so visceral.
And physically, things were tough too. Friends, family, they noticed she was fragile early on. The sources highlight her battle with bulimia, starting in her teens.
Yeah, that seems to have been really damaging. Her brother Alex even said later he thought the bulimia was what really killed her because it just weakened her body so much, made her more susceptible.
The sources also paint her as incredibly strong-willed. Stubborn, maybe?
Uh-huh. Her doctor mentioned she refused psychiatric help multiple times, worried it would dull her creativity. That single-minded nature. It cuts both ways, doesn't it?
It almost seems like she felt she needed the chaos to create. There are quotes about her saying contentment didn't inspire her, that she needed things to get out.
Even joking about needing some headaches gonna write about, it suggests, maybe subconsciously, maybe not, that she courted trouble for her art.
And the songs reflect that swing, right? Between bravado and total vulnerability.
Sometimes in the same line, she could snap, "What kind of fuckery is this?" and then immediately turn to self-blame. Critics point out that thread of self-recrimination running through everything, always feeling like she screwed things up.
So putting it all together, her music was this incredibly honest reflection of someone wrestling with depression, addiction, real pain. And that's why it connected, even while she was living through this psychological storm, as one source put it.
And that storm wasn't just internal. Her environment played a huge part in her slide into addiction, according to the sources, moving to Camden town after Frank.
Right, Camden. Famous for music, but also
Pubs, parties, drugs. It was that kind of scene. And with success and money, she dived right in, became a regular, always seen with the drink. That Rickstasy cocktail became kind of infamous.
people around her noticed a change, didn't they, as the partying got heavier?
They did. And this raises that really critical point the sources explore, meeting Blake Fielder Civil in 2005.
Ah, Blake. Yeah.
Her first manager said Amy changed overnight after meeting him. The connection was apparently electric, instant, but also deeply unhealthy from the start.
How so? What did the manager see?
He recalled that before Blake, Amy mostly just smoked cannabis, even laughed at people using harder drugs. But after meeting him, she became more withdrawn, more distant, and he felt it was down to the drugs. The timeline seems to link the start of harder drug use directly to him.
And Blake himself admitted it later.
He did. So he introduced her to heroin early in 2007, described her wanting to try it while he was using it. From then on, their whole relationship seemed fueled by crack, heroin, endless alcohol.
They got married in 2007, didn't they?
Yep. And Amy later said something like, "Our whole marriage was based on doing drugs." It sounds incredibly codependent.
Right.
Enabling each other, going off on binges, getting arrested together that time in Norway for pot.
You can almost hear it coded in the songs, too. Back to Black.
Exactly, that line. "I love you much, it's not enough. You love blow and I love puff." The sources explain blow was cocaine, puff was cannabis. Just starkly laying out their incompatibility, their different addictions. And life is like a pipe. It's pretty blunt.
Of course, it wasn't just Blake. The heartbreak, his infidelity, his jail time, that clearly fueled her pain and probably her substance use.
And the whole London party scene back then. Sources mentioned drugs were easy to get. Lots of people around her weren't saying no. Plus, her own binge drinking problem started even before the harder stuff.
Right. By late 2005, things were already getting worrying. Her management tried an intervention.
Yeah, they saw her stumbling around Camden, clearly struggling, tried to get her into rehab.
But she wasn't having it.
No. The sources say she swore up and down to her father she didn't need it, that she was fine. She walked out. And that specific moment, that refusal...
That's where rehab came from.
Directly. "If my daddy thinks I'm fine, I ain't got the time." That defiant lyric.
Which is just gut-wrenching, because by early 2007, she really wasn't fine. She was deep into heavy addiction.
Exactly. She did try rehab multiple times over the next few years, but it never seemed to stick for long. She'd always fall back into her old ways, as she put it.
Just highlights what the sources describe as this destructive cycle, doesn't it? Her inner demons, the enabling environment, all feeding each other. So hard to escape.
And as her problems spiraled, the media attention just got intense.
Intense is putting it mildly. Ravenous. Often cruel. Especially British tabloids.
Yeah, they turned her struggles into a daily spectacle. Paparazzi camped outside her house, waiting for those unflattering shots.
There was just no empathy, was there? The sources contrast the sensationalism with any real understanding of addiction or mental health.
None at all. The public narrative, fueled by the press, often painted her as this spoilt brat wasting her talent, not someone seriously ill.
I remember reading about that awful column in The Sun.
Oh, yeah, just vicious. Suggesting she be dragged by her egg yellow hair through a hospital ward to shame her, calling it a willful choice to ruin her health.
It completely ignored the nature of addiction as an illness. Sources say even other journalists looked back on that kind of coverage later with, real anger.
It just reduced her to this caricature, didn't it? The train wreck with the beehive? That image often completely overshadowed the actual person.
And what about the music industry itself? How did they handle it, according to the sources?
It's complicated. Her label didn't drop her. They clearly valued her talent. But there were definitely times when the pressure to perform, to keep the money train rolling, seemed to clash with her obvious ill health.
Like that canceled U.S. tour in 2007.
Exactly. Back to Black was huge. She should have been conquering America, but performances were becoming erratic, slurred. Officially, it was exhaustion, but everyone knew it was substance abuse.
And then jumping ahead to 2011, that European tour that got picked right after a rehab stint.
Yeah, May 2011, she does a short rehab stay, then boom, a 12-date tour is announced for June. Looking back, the sources are pretty clear. That decision seems incredibly reckless given how fragile she clearly was.
Which led to Belgrade.
The opening night, June 18th. Just a total disaster. It was all filmed.
Horrible to watch. Stumbling, forgetting words, sometimes not even singing, the band just playing, looking lost.
The crowd started booing. Moby was backstage. He described it as horrifying, said she was just standing there swaying, mumbling. A Serbian paper called it a staggering flop. It was a global public humiliation.
The tour got canceled immediately after that, right?
Yeah. Instantly. The statement said she needed as long as it takes to recover. But behind the scenes, the sources talk about finger-pointing. Label execs calling the tour decision mad. Her management defending themselves, saying they'd put tons of support in place, and Amy had agreed to it.
It just shows that tension, doesn't it, between her well-being and the demands of being a global superstar.
Absolutely. Her team did do things, minders, rehab attempts, canceling shows before, but the machine never fully stopped. Amy herself was famously resistant, saying things like, "I don't do what I'm told." But yeah, the industry seemed happy to just ride the Amy Winehouse wave until that very public crash in Belgrade.
Let's talk about her family and team more directly. Her dad, Mitch, played such a central role, didn't he?
Huge role. Clearly a loving father, very proud. A big musical influence, too, with the Sinatra stuff, even the name of her first album, Frank. And later, very visible as the guardian of her legacy.
But the sources suggest it was complex, sometimes enabling, or downplaying things.
There are hints of that, yeah, especially early on. That 2005 rehab attempt is a key example. She apparently deferred to him, swore up and down to her father she was okay, and that killed the intervention.
Which feeds right back into the rehab lyric, "If my daddy thinks I'm fine."
Exactly. It suggests his opinion really mattered to her, maybe reinforced her denial at that point. Though, to be fair, the sources also say Mitch did push for rehab later on. It wasn't black and white. His approach seemed to evolve.
He did try other things later.
Oh, yeah. Flying out to see her in St. Lucia, urging her to get help, reportedly confronting Blake. He was often there during hospital visits, legal issues. He worked closely with her management. Tragically, he and her manager were actually mid-flight when they got the news she'd died.
So perceptions of his role are really divided.
Very much so. People close to the family and management insist they really did try to save Amy, listing all the support systems.
But then you have the documentary, Amy.
Right. The 2015 film portrayed him quite differently, maybe missing signs, putting career first sometimes. Mitch strongly disputed that, called it misleading and hurtful. The sources kind of paint him as a dad watching this public self-destruction, maybe sometimes making mistakes or being in denial, but ultimately trying desperately to help.
What about the record label? Island Universal.
They stuck by her, professionally at least, celebrated her talent, planned for a third album. They apparently tried to give her space when things got bad.
But they were frustrated too.
You get that sense, especially that private reaction to the 2011 tour being mad. It suggests maybe they didn't feel fully in control or perhaps weren't always on the same page as management about how to handle such an unpredictable star.
And her manager, Race Cosbert. How is he portrayed?
Generally seen as trying to be a stabilizing influence. Sources mention his reputation for prioritizing artist welfare, and they list concrete actions under his watch. Multiple rehabs, sober companions, security, moving her out of Camden sometimes, curfews.
He argued they did everything possible.
Yeah, he said no one could have done more. Whether you agree fully or not, the sources show significant efforts were made.
So if you pull it all together, the relationship with her family and team was just fraught. Love, support, frustration, helplessness, all mixed up.
Exactly. They provided affection, opportunity, tried to manage the chaos. But ultimately, as the sources stress, Amy was an adult. No one could force her to get clean before she was ready. One veteran manager is quoted saying, "Even a welfare-first approach isn't always enough with demons like hers. External efforts couldn't just extinguish the internal battle."
Which brings us to that tragic final chapter. Early 2011, she makes another attempt at sobriety.
Yeah, checks into the Priory Clinic in London in May. Treatment for alcohol addiction. It seemed like a genuine last push.
But then came the plans for that comeback tour almost immediately after.
The one that, as the sources say, really should never have happened in hindsight.
Leading to that disaster in Belgrade in June. We talked about how awful that was, the videos, the humiliation.
A really painful public low point. After that, the tour was scrapped, and she basically retreated back home to London, went quiet.
Were there any signs of hope in those final weeks?
There were glimpses. Sources mention her popping up at the Roundhouse in Camden just days before she died, July 20th. Her goddaughter was performing. Amy didn't sing, but she came on stage, danced a bit, encouraged the crowd. That was her last public appearance.
So she was trying. People close to her felt that.
Yeah, they felt she was trying to stabilize. And importantly, the inquest found no illegal drugs in her system. She seemed to have kicked those, for the moment at least, but alcohol. That was the killer. She'd relapsed into binge drinking after being sober for a bit.
And that pattern is incredibly dangerous, physically.
Extremely. On her last night, July 22nd, her bodyguard said she was home watching music videos. She's tipsy but calm. Her doctor actually visited her that day.
What did the doctor say?
Noted she'd been drinking again, expressed concern. But Amy was apparently in good spirits, joked around, and crucially, she explicitly denied any suicidal thoughts.
She told the doctor she didn't want to die.
Specifically said that, according to the sources, it seems she thought she had more time.
But she didn't. The next morning, July 23rd.
Her bodyguard found her unresponsive in bed, just like that. Dead at 27, the shock was immense.
And the cause was confirmed pretty quickly.
Accidental alcohol poisoning. The inquest found her blood alcohol level was astronomical, 0.416%, more than 5 times the driving limit, 3 empty vodka bottles nearby. Her body, weakened by years of substance abuse and, as the sources stress, likely by the long-term effects of bulimia, just gave out.
So the official verdict was death by misadventure. No intent.
No intent to die, just a tragic consequence of addiction's grip in a moment of relapse.
It's just so sad, especially she seemed poised for something new. That duet with Tony Bennett came out later.
Won a posthumous Grammy for it. There were talks of a third album. Friends said they saw flashes of her old humor and sober joy in those final days, but the alcohol was just too powerful in the end. Her mother's quote is haunting. "We all expected it to happen sooner or later." That Belgrade performance and her lonely death, they really stand as this stark reminder of the human cost behind the fame. The memorial outside her Camden house was so poignant. Flowers, notes, but also bottles of booze and cigarettes left as tributes. A really bittersweet nod to who she was, struggles and all.
Joining the 27 Club. But her story did force some conversations, right? About mental health, addiction, the pressures in the music business.
Definitely. Sources suggest there's maybe a bit more awareness now, hopefully some positive shifts because of what happened to her and others. But her main legacy is the music, isn't it? Still sounds so raw, so passionate, so true. She's saying, we only said goodbye with words. And maybe that's right. Her voice, her art, it's still here, still shining despite everything.
So let's try and summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive, based on the sources you shared. We've traced this journey from just extraordinary jazz and soul-rooted talent
through to this devastating battle with addiction, fueled by her inner struggles, but also heavily influenced by her environment, her relationships.
and amplified by intense, often cruel media and industry pressure. And we saw the complex, difficult position her family and team were in, trying to support someone battling such powerful demons.
And why should you, listening, care about revisiting this? Well, this deep dive really tries to show the person behind the headlines, behind that caricature. It's a stark reminder that addiction is a disease, a really complex one, not just a willful choice.
It underscores the need for empathy, doesn't it? Especially for people living under that kind of intense public microscope while fighting private battles.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought, something provocative from the sources to leave you with. They make a point of stating that just hours before she died, Amy specifically told her doctor she did not want to die.
Yeah, that detail is powerful.
What does that tell us? About the grip of addiction, its unpredictability, that gap between someone's stated will, their desire to live, and the final tragic outcome. It's something heavy to reflect on after this deep dive.